the latest Russian atrocity, right, is a missile strike on a pizzeria. Okay, so this is the headline that you're going to see everywhere, BBC, CNN, that the Russians, because they're so evil and you know, just full of malice, they had nothing better to do than to use a $3 million missile on a pizzeria, just for the sake of it, just to blow a pizzeria. Maybe they hate Italian cuisine. Maybe they just want to murder civilians. You know, that's it. There's no need for me to do the segment or for us to use our brains or any critical thinking skills. Just accept the headline and go about your day. Okay? So here's what it says on CNN. Kramatorsk restaurant strike shows that in Ukraine, death can come anytime, anywhere. And there's some really, really, you know, I mean, the pictures, I can't even show you all the pictures and videos because it is horrible, right? We're not going to make light of that. But just so you see where the city is located. So this is quite, you know, it's close to the front line, okay? 25 kilometers, so it's 15 miles. There you go. Okay, in any case, let me read to you what they're saying about this because right now the count is that you've 11 people killed, okay, and including 14-year-old twin sisters, a 17-year-old girl, and 61 people wounded, including a baby. Okay, so that number is probably going to change, unfortunately, because when you have incidents like this, you have attacks like that, the number grows, or when earthquakes happen, you know, as they dig, they find more under the wreckage, unfortunately. Now, there are many aspects to this that I want to go through, okay? Because let me show you the Russians, what they're saying, and let me show you what Zelensky's saying, what the Ukrainians say, okay? This is the spokesperson for the Russian Defense Ministry. Let's take a look at what he said.
Kramatorsk, Донецкой Народной Республики. Поражен пункт временной дислокации командного состава 56-й мотопехотной бригады Вооруженных сил Украины. Воздушно-космическими силами России нанесены удары высокоточным оружием по объектам нефтепереработки и хранения топлива для обеспечения группировки Вооруженных сил Украины на Донбассе. Все назначенные объекты поражены. Цель удара достигнута.
Okay, now let's play Zelensky. All right?
Слава Україні! Політичне та військове керівництво Росії не має уникнути правосуддя через те, що у них нібито є імунітет, як у керівників держави. Вони не керівники держави, вони бандити, які захопили контроль над державними інституціями Росії. І вони абсолютно знахабніли безкарності, від цієї безкарності та почали тероризувати весь світ. Сплячі джерела руйнації та смерті, так звані заморожені конфлікти. Будь-який заморожений конфлікт – це війна. Це війна, яка неодмінно розгориться. І питання лише в тому, коли та скільки життів вона забере. Тому мир...
So Zelensky goes off on a tirade and you know, I guess you can't really blame him, but you know, he's still clinging onto this idea that Putin should not be given immunity at the BRICS summit, and that's what he was hinting at. And he was saying, you know, he's basically saying that there should be a tribunal, and Putin and you know, the rest of the Russian leadership, he just says the top brass basically should be put on trial. Okay, but what the hell's going on here? Because the Russians are saying that this was a military target. Was it a military target? I mean, some people are showing videos. I'm going to play them to you now, and claiming that because, you know, you have people speaking English there, that this shows they're mercenaries. I mean, just for the sake of argument, it doesn't really prove that at all. They could be anything. They could be journalists. They could be with Médecins Sans Frontières. They could be literally, I mean, anyone. What is the likelihood? Yeah, the likelihood is they're mercenaries. But it doesn't only mean that they're mercenaries. In any case, let me show you. Let me show you this video here.
Slava Bogu. Look what these bastards are doing to this country. There's soldiers under this rubble all over.
Who is under the rubble? Soldiers? I'm sorry, that doesn't compute with me because CNN just told me that, Russia blew up a pizzeria with civilians in it. Actually, even CNN, if you actually go through and start digging, look what they say here. Being so near the fighting, the city is popular with soldiers seeking some respite from the fighting. So some people think that this guy who I just showed you was speaking was narrating while filming. Some people said American. No, that guy's not American. He's not British either. That's a South African accent. Okay, and anyone who knows it or who's from South Africa can hear it. I think this is the same guy, right? Because I'm in scouring and picking up videos and getting all this stuff ready to show you guys, and I found another video. Listen to his voice and the accent.
Listen to me very carefully, everybody in Konstantinivka. Grab the 2 oxygen bottles on the floor. Get every single torch that you can find. Anything.
South African, right? Even whether that's a different person as the one narrating is irrelevant, okay? So this guy's in military slacks, he's in military fatigues. And the other one, so you got CNN, you got the people filming there, and you got on video and the Russians all saying that there are military personnel in this pizzeria, right? Or restaurant. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Now, I have a feeling the Ukrainians are caught off guard because they might have been thinking that they can have a meeting here or they can have, so-called consultants, mercenaries. Okay, these are ex-special forces, whether from South Africa or UK. I mean, what difference does it make, right? Because we know for a fact you have mercenaries and you have special forces. So, they're getting paid to do the same job just by different people. But we know you have Western special forces and you have also mercenaries that are in Ukraine, just like Syria, right? Same thing. And the question now is that, well, does this make it a valid or a legitimate military target? Well, ultimately that's going to be for the lawyers to decide, but I can tell you one thing, that in the Troubles, okay, so for those of you who don't know, that this is vaguely, it's the 30 years, right? So from the 60s until the 90s in Northern Ireland, where you had all these tit for tat, but I mean, it's from the Irish point of view, it's like it's one chapter, because this goes back many hundred years. It's one chapter to get British forces out of Ireland, right? So and you had the Good Friday Agreement, all that. I'm not going to go through this now. My point here is that back then, this was by both sides. Okay, so you had these Ulster paramilitaries that were backed by the British state, and on the other side, the IRA. Both of them understood that if there's a bar, there's a club, there's a disco, there's a restaurant, there's any venue, a civilian venue, mind you, that is frequented by British soldiers, then they're going to go blow it up. And it's a legitimate target because the British soldiers are occupying their land. They're occupying Ireland. So the fact that there are civilians there being injured, this is the fault of the British state for refusing to leave the country. Do you understand? So that was viewed as a legitimate military target. And then, of course, Hillcrest Bar bombing, for example, that's another one where the British state, through these Ulster paramilitaries, they went and blew up this bar just because Catholics went there. It was on St. Patrick's Day. So they're not even IRA or any militants or armed, in any capacity. Just Catholic. Just blow them up because they're Catholic. So, I'm not going to sit here and tell you like, oh yeah, well, this is normal, like who cares? Because this is in wartime, these things happen. No, you should care because it's really horrible. But the thing is that this whole war, we know who started it. We know who put their foot down and went through with this thing. The Russians are the only ones who tried diplomacy this whole time. And it's the Ukrainians who even don't take my word for it. You can go look at Amnesty International if you want to trust the NGOs and so on. This is from last year, okay? This is August 4th, 2022. This is Amnesty talking about how Ukraine is setting up, the Ukrainian military are endangering Ukrainian civilians by setting up military bases in residential areas, including schools and hospitals. They're launching attacks from populated civilian areas. And, they, of course, put this disclaimer here that it doesn't necessarily, just because the Ukrainians are doing that doesn't justify the Russians indiscriminately hitting civilians. But the thing is here that if the Russians are responding to a residential area where attacks were launched from, that's not indiscriminate, because you're admitting that yourself, that this is being turned into a military target by Ukraine, not Russia. So the same goes here for this restaurant. Okay? If the Ukrainians are bringing their mercenaries, well, I don't care if they're from South Africa or they're from the same country, from Ukraine itself, or they're bringing Ukrainian armed forces from the conventional armed forces. They're bringing any sort of military personnel into this place. That makes it a military target. And they know this. They're not stupid. They know this. And they've been doing this over and over. And do you remember last year there was this thing with the Kiev shopping center? You remember that? They said, the Russians, they just randomly blew up a shopping center. Apparently they really hate, they hate everything to do with shopping centers and pizzerias. And then it came out that actually you had Ukrainian tanks being parked underneath the goddamn shopping center. So the Ukrainians turned the shopping center into a military target. And this is similar stuff you'd see in Syria. You have, I'm not going to go through the list again, but all these groups that are funded from, by Turkey, by Israel. Well, yeah, Israel helped them in any case, definitely with Al-Qaeda. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UK, US, Germany. It's quite the list, right? They're all funding various groups in Syria, and then they would do the exact same thing where they're starting to hit the Syrian army from inside a residential area, and then the Russians go and they bomb it, and they say, the Russians are just indiscriminately bombing residential areas in Syria. Where'd you get that from? Where did you get that from? Right, same thing with the chemical attacks. That one doesn't make any sense and literally never happened. At least when we talk about this case here, both sides are saying yes, there's a strike that took place. With the chemical attacks, don't even get me started. That's just a complete rubbish, complete absolute rubbish. So the conclusion here is that not everybody running around in Ukraine speaking English as an American. I don't know why people just automatically assume they're Americans. This guy's clearly from South Africa, right? And we know that you have people from British Special Forces and so on and so on. All the Western countries going in and helping them, whether they're mercenaries or they are, because the mercenaries, they're working in these volunteer battalions, right? So-called, international legions. Let me just give you a counter argument here, because some people think that if you have somebody speaking English, then it was definitely a military target. Once again, no, this is irrelevant, what language they're speaking. The question here is, were there soldiers and military personnel convening in this establishment? Were they using it as a base of operations? Even if, let me explain this to you. If you have two officers who walk into a bar and they sit down and start planning something or discussing operations, they turn the venue into a legitimate military target. And they know this. They know the military law. They are not stupid. When you graduate, from whatever, I don't know what the Ukrainian equivalent of West Point or Sandhurst is, but when you are in the military, you know exactly what the military law is. They give you courses on this stuff. Okay? And so what I want to say here with the counter argument is that, you could have English journalists or doctors, whatever, running around. That's not the question here, right? But you do have people with insignia, so basically logos or patches from their battalions or regiments, or people wearing t-shirts and stuff. Again, I mean, that doesn't really prove anything. You can go on Amazon right now and buy a t-shirt with whatever. You can walk into a tattoo parlor and get a tattoo that says you're in the Marine Corps. Doesn't mean you're really from the Marine Corps. It's irrelevant, completely irrelevant. Once again, the question here is that, and which Zelensky he avoids and he doesn't address, because he says, oh, this is a barbarous act by the Russians and so on. Fine, okay. But what was going on here? Is this true that they were using this pizzeria as a base of operations? What the hell's going on? Like, the Ukrainians don't even address this. You know, they don't even try to counter what the Russians are saying. I don't know. I mean, you know, we're talking about national security. We're talking about international affairs, wars. These are enormous topics, you know, and Zelensky is the head of state. So when he's going on and said, oh, we need a tribunal for the Russians and this and that. What about Kiev Shopping Center? What about this pizzeria? Is there any truth to what the Russians are saying? I just look at it this way. Here's another way to look at it. This Iskander missile, which is what was reportedly launched today. This costs $3 million a piece. Do you really think the Russian army are going to waste a $3 million rocket on a pizzeria just because they like blowing up civilians? Do you really believe that? Maybe you believe that. I don't see the military or strategic value in this, and you know, there's too much of this. The Russians are so evil, and this dates back to before Ukraine. This goes back to Syria, right? So after the Russians entered the war, because the Russians kind of tipped the tide and you know, really destroyed all of these groups. And yes, they of course they damaged a lot of Syria doing that. Yeah, that's the problem, is that, you know, it shouldn't have to take the Russians coming in and helping fight off Al-Qaeda for the situation to stop. You know, a lot of these groups, they knew what they were doing. So my point here is that this goes back to in Syria, what they were doing before, accusing the Russians are bombing hospitals because they just like bombing hospitals. The Syrian army, they also they go in helicopters and just randomly drop barreled explosives. I mean, come on, man. Where'd you get this stuff from? You know, it's not like they have an incentive here to lie to you about this stuff. Of course they do. Of course they do. So my job is to challenge these assertions and these claims, these blanket claims that are fed, you know, for Western consumption, are fed to people in the West on a daily basis. That Russia is evil because it's just evil and they just like doing evil things. This is childish to me. This is like some cartoon villain bullshit. You know, if you want to go believe in that, go read some comic books or Batman or some shit. This is international affairs. You can't just believe what CNN says because they're CNN. Guess what? They have a track record of lying, and they do that all the time. And even Afghanistan. Remember, they said, the Russians are putting bounties on American soldiers. Also, complete nonsense. So I'm not going to believe them when they say this. I'm going to question it from a military point of view. Is this a legitimate target? Are the Russians do they really have this much money and weapons to just, launch and spend like that? I don't believe that. I don't believe this whatsoever. You know, the Russians are not perfect, and they've committed, I've no doubt they've committed war crimes in Ukraine, just because that's how war is. You have both sides that are going to commit war crimes. And I was even showing you before, when they were filming these Ukrainian soldiers, it's a violation of Geneva Convention. I don't care what anyone says. That's the law. You're not allowed to just put cameras in people's faces because they're POWs. And that's, both sides did this, okay? This is over a year now, but I'm sure it's going to happen again, unfortunately. My point here is that, you know, when it comes to the Russians, they don't make money from these wars. It's not about money. If it were money, if there were an incentive to make money, then you could start questioning, well, yeah, actually, it makes total sense that they would just start randomly bombing people because they want to drop as many bombs and restock as much as possible. The rules of engagement, what are these rules of engagement? Are they relaxed? Are they strict? You know, this is also another thing that you would ask. But in this case, again, you have CNN, you've got the people on the site all admitting that you have soldiers in this place. And unfortunately, that's the fault of the Ukrainian military. They are the ones who are endangering civilians by frequenting these venues, spending time in these venues. And they're not stupid. They know that the Russians are watching them. You remember at the beginning of the war, you had a bunch of morons who thought they were very smart, and they just like went all the way to Ukraine and started using their phones with British numbers. And the Russians, I mean, any police department in the world can do this, never mind the Russian military. They've got Stingrays, these devices that fit in a suitcase, and they can start monitoring your communications, SMS calls, your number, you know, all of this stuff just by opening it up in the car, right? It basically acts as a fake antenna, and your phone just, you know, is none the wiser and just connects to it. And the Russians, they saw all these British numbers, you know, and foreign numbers in a concentrated area, and just they struck the damn thing. And who was telling people to go fight? The British government. I don't remember now if it was the foreign secretary or the home secretary. I showed you these videos. They're saying, yeah, we have nothing against people going and fighting in Ukraine. Well, guess what? You just killed a bunch of your own people. But I'm going off on a tangent here. There you go. Just to keep that in mind when you hear this stuff about Kramatorsk, which just happened today, and you know, the last 24 hours, and then the Kiev shopping center, and all these civilian targets. Because every couple of weeks, if not days, they try to, you know, feature this crap like, oh, there's just people, you know, Dr. Evil is working at the Russian MOD or something. One day the Russians are incompetent. They have no weapons. They've run out of drones and you know, armaments. And then the next day, oh, they have so much weapons to just, you know, splurge on and use against civilians. These are contradictions. These don't make sense.